So do you want to be on?
Oh, I was looking for that. Thanks.
So it's about that time. Shane, are you ready to go?
The survey, and just remember, you can tell people.
It's here. The sign came up about recording already, Harvey. So I think you can go ahead.
Okay. Okay.
Charlie, I'm going to go ahead and start.
These are some at the back.
Already. Okay. So good morning, everyone. If you want to be seen, I need to move this a little bit. The talk this morning that I want to give is on thoughts and experience and judgment and experience. And I kind of came up with this theme before looking at the reading for the day, but it turns out that the reading for the day and this talk are completely enmeshed. So welcome everybody online and welcome people in Houston. This is our first Sunday of the month. It is August 6th, and Lama Rigdzin and myself, we are in Capitan, New Mexico. So we're doing this global recording kind of thing. We also have our presence in Houston at the Metropolitan Dance Studio in Houston, Texas. And lovely to see everybody from everywhere around the world. So there's an interesting way of looking at Buddhist practice that if we had time, I would tie it into one of the theoretical schools, which is called the mind-only school. But I won't do that now. But suffice it to say that I think we all start off before practice in a kind of ordinary sense of things, ordinary mind. We live in a kind of dualistic conception. We have, from the Buddhist perspective, kind of imaginations as to what's going on and what's real and how things are. Duality is a big piece of that for most of us, and certainly holding on to some kind of autonomous, independent sense of self is another piece of that, that from the Buddhist perspective is leads to a lot of difficulty and a lot of pain. So that's our beginning spot. And then our practice, a lot of our practice has to do with very, very careful assessment of experience. Involvement in diverse practices that may be looking at our experience, may be looking at mindfulness of the breathing. We look at our experience very, very carefully. It might even involve imaginative practices, but even in the imaginative practices, we're looking at our experience very, very carefully. And ultimately, we end up with some profound understanding of the true nature of reality. So there's kind of mistakenness, there's exploration, and there's kind of the true nature of reality. We tend to be lost in a world of thought. And those thoughts are, in a way, kind of stories that we tell ourselves. And I understand there's a lot of noise if I move things. I'll try not to. Our stories tend to be relatively heavy, and we tend to feel that things are kind of stuck and immovable. And really a big linchpin of Buddhist practice is appreciating things are impermanent and ephemeral. And it takes practice to arrive at that. It takes practice to have that not just be a kind of belief or a thought or a conception or a hunch, but where you start really kind of in it. You know that things are really ephemeral. You are in very, very close experiential contact with the ephemerality of experience. It's very, very easy for us, certainly at the beginning stages of practice, to confuse thoughts and judgments and experience. You know, we often emphasize that our meditation is a practice in attention, which it is, but it is also a movement away from being absorbed in thought to turning towards the immediacy of experience. Thoughts can be very, very useful, and we're not going to get rid of thoughts, but they also tend to obscure details. They move in generalizations, and they can often miss the richness of lived experience. The richness of lived experience. So, one metaphor that often comes to mind for me is like when we really, really get lost in our thoughts, it's sort of like going to a buffet and having a glass partition in front of the food that prevents you from smelling any of the food, which makes it very, very difficult to really make decisions about what you might want to eat. I'm often confronted in my psychotherapy practice with people who are trying to make life decisions. And one of the ways that I see the difficulty with thought is that people who make a pro and con list about, let's say, whether moving forward in a relationship or a job, and the pros and cons are all listed as thoughts, but people don't spend time trying to feel into, in an embodied way, what each one of these pros and cons actually feels like for them. And when you just have a list of pros and cons and there's no felt sense, no bodily engagement with emotion, it's actually impossible to make any decisions. When we're just engaged in thought, we can get really involved in a whole bunch of emotional cascades that are not productive. We can get into black and white thinking. We can get into catastrophizing. If any of you are interested in this, David Burns has got a book called The Feeling Good Handbook. It's really about the kind of the mistakes of thought that conduce to depression. But they're thoughts, they're ways of getting lost in our minds. In Buddhism, the biggest errors have to do with the way we conceive of impermanent things as permanent, conceive of things that are ultimately not fully satisfying as satisfying, and the way we conceive of things as being autonomous and independent when actually everything is dependently originated. I think one of the most useful similes for all of this, and it's an experience that I think almost all of us have some familiarity with, is the firebrand. You know, if you take a piece of burning charcoal at night, many of us did this when we were in camp, or we did it with a stick of incense. At a certain point, it's dark, and you twirl it into a circle, and so you see a circle. It seems to be a solid circle. A reality is that it's just points of charcoal moving very, very rapidly. Our eye cannot keep up with it, so it looks like a solid circle. All of our experience, and certainly our scientific worldview, supports this, is momentary, evanescent, changing from moment to moment, and yet we see things as solid, we see things as permanent and unchanging, when at core they're ephemeral, evanescent. And so we create these stories of the solid circle when all there is this moving piece of charcoal, point to point to point to point. Television is, of course, another modern experience of this. If you have any understanding of how the old televisions worked, or even the new televisions work, the images which appear solid are basically pixels of information that are just flashing. Our eyes are too slow to see the slow flashingness of the pixels. We take things that are changing to be solid and unmoving, and then we create stories around them. We have these overarching tales that we tell ourselves all the time that become very heavy, very lugubrious, unchanging. And if we start developing wisdom, part of the process is that things get lighter, the stories get lighter. We realize that things that perhaps seem unchanging are actually changing moment to moment. Perhaps things that we think are just inevitably black or white, that they're actually quite complex, rich, and variegated in ways that create openings that if we just sort of stuck, we can't see. I've been reading Andrew Holacek's book called Reverse Meditation, and he points out it's obvious that our physical experience is always of necessity immediate. If I were to ask you, what will you be feeling in your thigh tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you can't tell me anything. But if I ask you now, what's happening in your sitting, there's something very, very immediately present. So I'm going to have us do an experiment. And this is going to actually involve some feedback. So the first part of the experiment is just very, very quickly, just get a sense of what you would describe the nature of your experience of sitting on whatever it is you're sitting on feels like. There's some feeling that you have as you're sitting on a chair or on a cushion or on the floor. And what word might you use for that contact between your support and your body? And I would ask anybody to volunteer what you feel that's like. There are no right or wrong answers. You can unmute, and or you can use a microphone if you're in Houston to explore it and share with us. Anybody? Just what does it feel like? What you're sitting? You're sitting. Here comes somebody.
I think for me, I'm like really sore right now because I've been working out like the last few days. And so being in that chair is just like calming and I don't feel soreness. So that's my current feeling of my body.
Feels calming. Very good.
Who was that?
Who was that? Can you tell us who you were?
We couldn't see you.
Who was it?
Oh, thanks, Nellie.
Who was it?
Nellie.
Okay. Charlotte.
It feels hard. The chair feels hard. So,
Very
and then
good.
this cat in my lap. It feels kind of.
Anybody else? What it feels like just sitting on your chair? There are no wrong answers. Or your cushion. Yes, Wendy.
I feel like there's a heaviness and a solidness.
Thank you. Heaviness and solidness. Okay, this is wonderful. So everybody had a kind of initial impression. So now I'm going to ask all of you to go back and revisit, but now with just a lot of curiosity, what is the actual experience that you're having in contact with your support. And what is it like? I'm going to. What is it like? What does it actually feel like? And as you sense into that, see if the words that you would use change, or what happens to your description of your experience. How is it for you to sense into this? Just give yourself a bit, sense into the contact with what you're where you're sitting. Just be curious. Okay, so what are you finding? Anybody? What's the nature of your experience of contact between your body and the support of your body? And or was there some change in your impression of what was going on? Wendy?
I'm feeling what I didn't feel before is like a warmness, and only part of my yeah, I'm sitting cross-legged, so the only part of my bottom is on having contact, so there it's just kind of centered
So there's
rather than spread out.
and how do you detect that there is warmness? How is warmness?
I guess I'm comparing it to other parts of my body that, you know, is warmer than comparatively, it's warm compared to my upper body. The
Okay.
contact part is warmer.
Good, good. Thank you. Kat? You're muted. Need to unmute, Kat.
Initially, it was just 2 points, sits bones on a hard surface. And now I've realized my legs are under the chair position to lift me up just a little bit up off that hardness. One of them particularly in a very cramped position.
Mm-hmm. So you got more aware of your legs, and one of them is in a cramped position. Okay, good. Thank you.
That's
Anybody else?
I can't tell if Charlotte was raising her hand before or not.
Charlotte, did you have your hand up?
I didn't, but I can tell you, I was feeling pain in my back, and just a second ago, it seems to have kind of gotten, you know, disappeared or lessened. Or whatever. So, you know, these are pretty mundane observations, but you know.
Well, it's a mundane observation that may be a gateway to the profound. So this is actually just a very bite-sized piece of basic mindfulness meditation. And we can often look at very, very ordinary experience. You know, often in mindfulness training, they'll just give people raisin to suck on. You know, you put the raisin in your mouth initially and it's like raisin, the thought raisin, but then you suck on it for 5 or 10 minutes. And what is the experience like? And then, you know, there's sweet, but then you experience what is sweet actually like? How do we know sweet? How do we know something is sweet? And you may still be tapping into some kind of experience, but it may be very, very hard to put words on what sweet is like, what warmth is actually like. And there may ultimately be a kind of mystery or a spaciousness that starts unfolding around the exploration of the immediacy of your experience. That is kind of mysterious, deep, moving. I know I have at least 2 artists in our midst that I know of, maybe more, 3 now that I'm counting, that I know of. And I think one of the things that artists are very, very good at is A, moving into experience, but B, probably even feeling some of that mystery and spaciousness and holding that contains the details of our experience. We don't need to escape from our actual experience. We just need to be aware of it ever more carefully and clearly. So one of the other things that obstructs this kind of immediacy is judgment. Things are good, things are bad. And even when we practice something like mindfulness, judgment can really creep in. And, you know, I do offer the acronym FACES for our practice: fresh, accepting, curious, equanimity or evenness, and sensitivity. But acceptance is really, really hard for most of us. We swim in so much judgment. And judgments certainly get involved in our stories. This person was late because they don't care for me, and I've got to lash out at them, and I've got to let them know reality and that I matter. These are all steeped in judgments. And I'm remembering Bunlop Rinpoche wrote a very, very nice book on it's the Mantabhadra Dzogchen prayer. It's a very, very profound prayer. And I think it's in that book that he suggests that, you know, when you're really, really upset and you want to work with the upset, one way to do that is to start focusing on the experience of the energy of the upset. Another way to say that would be focus on the physical somatic experience of your upset. Let's say you're angry, you're hateful, you're jealous, you're anxious. Can you just be mindful of what's occurring in your body? Let go of the story. Our stories fuel a kind of mind thing that we don't get out of. And can we just be in the immediacy of our experience? And when we're in the immediacy of our experience, we do notice that things change. Things are moving. Things are permeable. Things that felt solid and unchangeable. This person is terrible towards me, and they're always going to be terrible towards me, and I've got to sort things out forever. And we just realize that our physical sensations associated with anger and hate are very, very intense. But when you start paying attention to them, you notice your mind gets very, very clear. Your mind gets very, very settled. And something different can happen. So this is an encouragement to curiosity. And our practice of mindfulness is the basic 5-pound dumbbell that is a doorway to these skills. We're looking at our breath, the movement of the breath, or the breath at a particular point, at our nostrils, at our abdomen, 3 finger widths below the navel, 3 finger widths in. And we're just curious as to what is this experience of breathing? Thoughts come, thoughts go. We don't get involved with thoughts. We're involved with the physical experience with curiosity. Like, this is the first time I ever experienced breathing. And that kind of freshness is a muscle that we bring to all of our experience. And Lama Rigdon wishes to share something.
I'm thinking how in my own experience, there is a kind of throwaway gesture. You know, I notice something, but before I can really get there, something in me says, well, that's not important. And I was reminded of that by your saying, Charlotte, you know, that the pain that you were speaking of was something mundane. And well, in a sense, it is mundane. And I think what's really important for us, and what Lama Nagel is saying, is that there's value. It's not a throwaway. You know, there's value in our looking closely into whatever is occurring. Simple things: solidity, coolness, pain in the back, pain going away. To have immediate experience of these, though, and to be curious about them is just a whole other way of living. And it's not just mundane in that sense. So to encourage us all, including myself, not to do this subtle throwaway. It's valuable.
Yeah, most of us, when we have pain, we feel like the pain will go on forever. And when the pain changes, we don't pay attention to the fact that it has disappeared. And there are so many things we don't pay attention to. Most of us are actually have some tastes of spaciousness, some tastes of our true nature. We don't pay attention. You know, in psychotherapy, one of the most interesting things and groundbreaking in couples therapy, it's so odd, but people realized we need to ask the question, what brought the fight to an end? I mean, we spend a lot of time on like what created the fight, but most couples do stop fighting. And most people who have disagreements do stop having the disagreement. What brings about a reconciliation? What brings about an end to a fight? What brings about, or how is it that a pain that was there disappears? How is it that maybe when we thought something was hard initially and we start looking at it more carefully, there's a change? What's the nature of that perception of hardness that all of a sudden is changing? What's the nature of that changingness? So looking at how things get perforated and start feeling lighter and start moving is a critical aspect of our practice. And so I notice that we have a time change here in terms of we're moving out of our teaching at 10:30. It's now 11 Central Time. I'll just take a moment. Do you need to do anything, Shane, by way of changing something? Maybe not.
I have the book of names for the dedication. If anybody has any names that they'd like to add, one thing I would ask is be careful that you write legibly so I can read the names.
So welcome, everyone. Today is Sunday, August 6th. We are broadcasting from Capital